Hello, Aaron Kubitz, personal trainer at Functional Aesthetics EC. We're helping average guys perform better in their lives inside and outside the gym. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about a topic that there's a lot of misconceptions around, and that is the topic of calories. First off, what a calorie is, what the function of the calorie is, and how to track and measure calories over time, and how effective that might be. As you'll see as I get later into this video talking about the different facets that I'm going to cover, which is 6 different topics here related to calories, is that calorie counting will only get you so far. So in the beginning, calories, like most people know that if you want to lose weight, you need to be eating less calories, right? But there are adjustments that happen in the body that can affect how many calories you're burning in the long term, and also measuring calorie burn is not an exact science either. So my belief when it comes to counting calories or diets in general is that they're a good place to start, a good baseline, but from there you need to also have a way to essentially be a detective versus a dieter, a way to monitor what are the effects that this diet is having on my body, what is going on in the body, and over time that I can detect whether or not I'm on the right track. And actually that's something that I've done in my Fat Loss Guide ebook, which I can provide a link in the description below here for you if you want to check that out. And it kind of goes over how to determine whether or not you're on the right track. First off, how to establish that baseline of the proper number of calories, the amount of macronutrients, protein, carbohydrates, and fats that you should be taking in on a consistent basis, and then also how to monitor whether or not to change your macronutrient ratios or to change the amount of calories you're taking in based upon the signs and symptoms you're getting from your body. For many people, calories are the devil and should be reduced at all costs, and the lower you go, the better. Hence, how many calories does this food have, not how many nutrients does this food have. So calories are not inherently bad, and just because and the ability of a food to either cause you to gain weight or to lose weight is not an accurate predictor of whether or not that food is healthy. Now, the reason why many people think this way is not surprising. Today we live in a society that is pretty contrary to the natural state of way things should be. We have greatly improved many aspects of our life with the introduction of different technologies and stuff that have made it easier for us to have access to food and calories than we had in the past with minimal effort. In fact, today, depending on what kind of job you have, you don't have to do any physical activity whatsoever to get your food for the day, which never really happened in societies in the past unless you were a sick person or you're bedridden, and then you would be like a person in the nursing home today. Another area, or the second area to consider in regards to this unnatural environment, is that not only do we have easier access to food through making more systematized means of acquiring this food, going from small farms in the past or hunter-gatherer societies where you're out there hunting and gathering your nutrients and stuff like that. And so sometimes you're on a feast and a famine cycle. And with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, systematized production of means and more scientific methods of farming, we can mass produce different food items and get a lot of calories with far less labor on our part and on a more consistent basis as well. Now, just because you have calories more readily available does not mean that these calories are the most nutritious. In fact, the opposite is actually most of the time true. Because of the need to mass produce things and as in any business, the main driver is the means of acquiring more money, finances, the acquiring of wealth, essentially. Any business does not survive if you have money, and so if you don't have money. And so that is always at the top of mind of every business person, regardless of whether or not they are, they are also trying to, provide and add value to society, and ultimately no business is going to survive long term unless it's artificially supported by the government, unless it is providing value consistently over a long period of time. As soon as you stop providing value and people stop finding value from the information or the product or the service that you're providing, they will go away, and your business will go away. So with that being said, oftentimes in the pursuit of having a good business model for producing these crops and producing these food items more efficiently, the quality of those food items also goes down in the process, and so they're less nutritious, although more abundant. So those are two primary reasons why many people fear calories. So the calories are more readily available. They're getting less activity in their day-to-day lives, leading to atrophy of muscles, decreased metabolic efficiency, and then also the minimal amount of calories burned through regular day-to-day exercise. And then also the quality of those calories that you're taking in, the body doesn't necessarily use them efficiently or even know what to do, and they can even cause inflammation in the body, which can mess up with your hormonal systems, which can then contribute to increased stress and also increased weight gain, even when calories are not overly abundant. Although usually excess calories or imbalances in the kinds of calories you're getting contributes to this weight gain and thus the fear of calories in general. So in today's video, I hope to cover 6 different areas, 6 misconceptions related to calories, and hopefully clear up some of this in your mind so that you can go forward more informed and be less fearful of calories and know how to use them to your advantage and become more of a detective, a scientist, and an architect of your health rather than somebody who's jumping from one dietary trend to the next. Okay, so the first misconception when it comes to calories is that it requires 3,500 calories to lose. You need to burn 3,500 calories above and beyond what you need in order to lose a pound of fat. And this is actually something that I just recently learned, but apparently in 2012, the American Society of Nutrition and the International Life Sciences Institute put out a joint statement refuting this. And the reason why that it's not 3,500 calories, because there are 3,500 calories in 1 pound of fat, okay? But the way that they measure the amount of calories in something is they put it into something called a bomb calorimeter, which is actually a double-walled metal container where on the inside you have water, right? And then on the outside, you have the food that's to be burned, right? And you burn the food, and if it raises, and 1 calorie is the amount of energy required to raise the temperature of the water 1 degree Celsius. So if you're burning 1 pound of fat, so the scientist, he put this pound of fat inside the bomb calorimeter and it exhibited 3,500 calories worth of heat energy. And so then they thought, okay, you need to burn 3,500 calories in order to lose 1 pound of fat. Well, the problem is that our bodies are much more complex than a calorimeter, right? There's many different metabolic processes, hormonal systems and stuff like that in the body, as you'll see later on in this video, is not actually 100% efficient in the way that it burns calories. There's actually a lot of waste, and it's weird. It's kind of interesting if you look at the body in general that there is a lot of inefficiencies in the way that the body is constructed. It's not built for peak efficiency in any one area, and I'm not quite sure why that is, but would be an interesting topic for maybe a future video if I get the time to look into that. So not only is the body not 100% efficient in the way that it burns calories, the body also needs to pivot and adjust. It will also pivot and adjust its calorie expenditure due to the environment that it's in. And so typically after the first couple of weeks of calorie restriction, you're going to see your weight loss begin to slow down, plateau, and then maybe just halt altogether. And this is why typically it's not recommended to sustain calorie restriction for prolonged periods of time, rather to take breaks at different stages of your diet to maintain your weight loss, focus on other things, and even if you have the time and the inclination to do so, what you can do is have various different stages where maybe you do like a low calorie, maybe low carbohydrate diet, high protein diet. You always want to keep your protein pretty high, right? And then whether or not you're trying to maintain, increase, or drop weight, depends on where the other calories are coming from. But what you do is that maybe you go for a period where you're reducing your calories, right? And you're either trying to, reduce your body weight, or you're just not doing a lot of activity. You have other things that you need to focus on. And so you follow a lower calorie, lower carbohydrate diet for a while. And then if you have the time, like I said, and the inclination to do so, you can take advantage of something called G-flux or energy flux, right? So they had some studies where they actually tracked people, and I think I've talked about this in previous video as well, where they tracked the people over time, and they noticed that. So they had a couple different groups. They had 3 different groups, and they had the one group was like your calorie. They reduced their calories and kept their activity levels the same, right? The other group, they achieved a caloric deficit by maintaining the same calorie level but increasing their energy expenditure so that they were in a calorie deficit. The third group, they increased energy expenditure, but also increased their caloric intake so that they were at a net, neutral position there. So they weren't in a calorie deficit. Now what they found, not surprisingly, both groups lost in the first two, the calorie restriction groups, they lost weight. Right? And that's not surprising. However, the one that was exercising, they lost 1.3 more, I think it was 1.3 kilograms more visceral fat than the one in the calorie restriction only group. Meaning that exercise, even if you can lose weight without exercise, is still more beneficial to lose weight in conjunction with exercise. Exercise is going to be more beneficial overall. Now the third group, this is interesting. They didn't actually lose any weight, but they maintained their body weight, but they actually lost body fat. So their body composition changed. And this is actually more important than losing weight. Whether you want to look better, or you want to be healthier, or you want to perform better, all 3 of those instances, an improvement in body composition is going to be ideal for that. Meaning you have more muscle, so the ability to have a higher work capacity, higher metabolic rate. You're also going to have decreased body fat covering that muscle. So while you may weigh the same amount, you're going to look much leaner. You're going to have that quote-unquote toned look because you have more muscle with less body fat, although your body weight overall is the same. And then as far as your metabolic health, your insulin sensitivity is going to be higher. Your glucose disposal rate is going to be higher. All your hormonal profiles are going to be healthier, and you're going to be less risk for chronic diseases related to poor metabolic health overall. And so the third group, and this is why I'm saying, you may focus on reducing calories and, exercising at one point to drop that body fat down, right? And lose some weight. But then you may want to, if you have the extra time and the desire to, focus on a period where you're not trying to lose weight per se, but you're increasing your activity level and then just eating enough to match how much you're burning in your activity level, and then periodically cycling back and forth between those two, and that can actually help you to have better long-term outcomes. Because the last thing in this regard that I want to say, and this is very critical and very important, actually pretty exciting news too, is that the people in this group, so they had another study, right, where they just had the group where they decreased their calories, but they monitored their activity levels to make sure they weren't doing more activity than they were previously. And then the other group was increasing their calories and also increasing their exercise. And between the two groups, the one that was increasing their exercise, they actually saw a maintenance or even slight increase in their metabolic rate, while the other group saw a gradual decline in their metabolic rate, meaning they were burning less calories over time, which is anybody who's tried dieting in the past, the yo-yo diets and stuff like that, you know that every time you try to diet in the future, it becomes harder and harder to lose weight because your body is more adapted to that. So by following this G-Flex protocol, or just simply exercising more and also eating more, you will be avoiding that. You'll be ramping up your calories, your metabolism, and also burning more body fat and increasing lean muscle mass at the same time. So it's the trifecta of the ideal metabolic scenario. So the second misconception about calories is that food labels are accurate. So while the Food and Drug Administration allows a 20% margin of error, meaning that a label that says that something has 400 calories in it could actually have as much as 500 calories in it. The Journal of Obesity actually did a fact check on this and tested various different popular snack foods for the accuracy of the calories in them, and they found that they're only off on average by 4.3%. So if you go into that same 400 calorie thing, it could maybe be off by 15 to 20 calories above or below that. And so that's not a significant amount of calories. The thermic effect of food could account for that. However, it's a lot harder to mess up or get the calorie count of basic foods that don't have multiple ingredients in them wrong, such as like a potato, right? Or a pork chop, or a banana, for instance, right? It's easier to accurately calculate those than it is snack foods and other highly processed foods. And there's going to be much more predisposition for error on things that are not from whole food sources. So yet another reason why you'd want to eat more whole foods versus foods that are highly processed. Not only do the whole foods have higher nutrient value, and because at the end of the day, our bodies are just complex compilation of elements off of the periodic table, right? And it requires different vitamins and minerals for these chemical reactions to happen appropriately in the body. And if any one of those vitamins or minerals is severely deficient, or your body is it can cause you to not absorb other vitamins and minerals, which then can have effects, or those vitamins and minerals themselves can have deleterious effects on the interactions happening in the body. So the third misconception in regards to calories is that the physical structure as well as the processing method of the food has no bearing on the calorie content or the amount of calories that you absorb. So case in point would be, for example, almonds. So let's say an ounce of almonds has 168 calories, but studies have shown that there's only the average person is only absorbing about 128 of those calories from something like the almonds. Now, some of this could have to do with the cellular structure of these foods being very tough, right? And so if you're having it, even if like in a raw state or something, could be even harder to digest. And so when people, like, I remember years ago when I was in high school, raw food diets were very popular. So a lot of people would be eating raw foods and be losing a lot of weight and stuff. And I actually was interested in raw foods as well for a while, but not for weight loss reasons, rather for the increased amount of enzymes that are supposedly in raw foods. But if you think about it, if you ate grass or tree bark, you would lose weight, right? And so it doesn't necessarily mean that the food is healthier. It just means that it's harder to extract the nutrients from that food. The same goes for things like pistachios and walnuts. They're also more difficult to absorb as well. Now, they also had a study on the preparation methods of the food, right? So they had a study where they had some mice, and they had the mice either eating cooked sweet potatoes or raw sweet potatoes. And the mice that ate the cooked sweet potatoes gained weight, while the mice that ate the raw sweet potatoes lost weight. Now, this doesn't mean that raw sweet potatoes are necessarily better for you than cooked sweet potatoes. In fact, there are certain elements and compounds in raw sweet potatoes that could be potentially hazardous to your health, digesting them and stuff. But merely the fact that the food, the calories or the energy within that food is you can acquire it with less effort on the part of your body. So this kind of goes back to what I was talking about previously, that just because a food has more calories or less calories, or has a capacity to help you lose weight or gain weight, doesn't mean that it is inherently healthy or unhealthy. Okay, there are some very calorie-dense foods, such as like butter, whole milk, salmon, things like that are actually beneficial for your health. And also different nuts and stuff are very, and they're calorie dense, right? But they're also very healthy for you, right? It's just the quantity of them that you're eating. Now, one thing I will say about this is that a lot of times it's the way that the hormones affect your body that determine ultimately how many calories you end up eating in the long run, right? Because just because you're eating a very calorie-dense food doesn't mean that you're going to end up eating more calories in total. So if you're eating, let's say, for example, a donut versus a chicken breast with the skin on, they would potentially, depending on the donut, right, have about the same amount of calories in them. But the chicken breast most of the calories are coming from protein and fat, right, which is going to have far less effect on your blood sugar than having that donut. Same thing with chicken breast with the skin on versus a bowl of cereal, right? You're going to stay full longer, and if you do go on empty, you're going to be able to focus as well, because there's going to be less of the up and down of the blood sugar. So just because of the calorie content of the food doesn't mean that it's healthy or unhealthy. And going back to the main point of this one, which was the preparation method of the food and the physical structure of the food, is that foods that have been frozen or toasted are also going to have less calories than otherwise. Also, if you cook rice and then let it cool down, it'll also have less calories than the rice had prior to the cooking, or when it was in a more heated up state, right? So that is some other things I guess you could consider as well when it comes to the calories and stuff. So the fourth misconception in regards to calories is that eating too much of any one macronutrient will cause you to get fat. Now, some macronutrients may contribute it due to downstream hormonal things, but in particular what we're talking about here is too much protein. So when I was first getting my personal training certification, some of the advice was a bit outdated, and they said that if you ate too much protein, eating too much protein could contribute to weight gain or gaining more fat, right? Well, as it turns out, of all the macronutrients, protein, even in a calorie surplus, is the least likely to contribute to fat gain. There is actually a study done by Dr. Dr. Joey Antonio, that tracked the effects of a super high protein diet on weight-trained men and women. So these people had prior strength training experience. They were active individuals, and what they did is they split them up into two groups. They had the one group increase their calories by 800 calories per day above that of the control group. So a pretty substantial amount, considering that they typically say if you want to gain weight, you increase your calories by about 500 calories per day. If you want to lose weight, you decrease it by 500 to a little bit more per day to lose that weight, right? So in effect, this should have caused them to gain weight. Now, all the extra calories were coming from protein. They were eating about 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight. Now, what they found at the end of the study was that there was no change in either body weight or body composition. Now, the body composition portion seems a little bit confusing to me, because actually oftentimes if you eat a high protein diet coupled with high intensity strength training, you will actually tend to build more muscle and as a result increase metabolic rate and then also drop fat. So your body composition, you might become more lean as a byproduct of that. But at any rate, in this study they found that there was no difference, even though they're eating, so they've shown that even eating 5.5 times as much as the recommended allowance of protein will not cause that. Now, some of my theories on why this is that of all the macronutrients, protein has the highest effect on thermic effect, right? Or the amount of calories that have to get burned to digest that food. So protein, about 30% of the calories in the protein are going to get burned just digesting the protein. And it's also been my experience that people who eat a high protein diet tend to eat less calories inadvertently, right? It's very filling. I give the example of, now this wasn't the case in the study, they were actually eating more calories, right? They're eating 800 calories more per day and still didn't gain any weight over the course of the study. Their body composition didn't change. But all that aside, people who tend to eat more protein, they also tend to eat less calories in general. So when I was a long distance runner, I would eat a lot of cereal in the morning for breakfast, sometimes as much as 5 to 7 bowls of cereal, and this was stuff like granola and grape nuts too, right? I'd eat a lot of cereal in the morning for breakfast because I was running, 50 miles a week, actually closer to 60 because of the mile in the morning with a dog, and I was also doing several hundred sit-ups every night before bed. I was just active in general, right? So when I switched over and started strength training, I was eating, about 4 bowls of cereal in the morning, right? Again, granola type stuff. And then I decided, well, I want to bulk up, so I'm going to add some more protein to my diet. And so I started making whey protein shakes where I'd blend up peanut butter, banana, whey protein, and milk, and then I'd pour that on my cereal. And that dropped my consumption of cereal from the 4 bowls down to like 2 or 3 bowls of cereal because it was just so filling doing that. So that tends to happen as well. But if you're worried about eating too much protein, there are other reasons why you wouldn't want to eat too much protein, right? Not that it's going to be bad for your kidneys, that's been debunked in the past, but actually for athletic performance reasons, right? Eating protein above like 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight shows no more positive benefits on building muscle or repairing tissues, and it's using up a lot of calories that could be allotted towards carbohydrates or fat, which are going to be a lot more beneficial for producing that high octane energy that you need, because the converting protein into energy is a lot more complex and slower and less efficient than, say, converting carbohydrates into energy. So you'd be better off eating that, 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, or even 0.7 grams of protein per pound of lean body weight, and then having the rest of your calories coming from, your choice of fat and carbohydrates, whichever blend of, a ratio of fat and carbohydrates works best for you, so that would be the reason why you don't want to eat too much protein, not because it's going to cause you to get fat. Eating too much in general will cause you to get fat, but if anything, if you eat extra protein, if you accidentally eat too much calories and those extra calories come from protein, that would be the side to actually err on versus eating too much carbohydrates, which would be more easily, or even too much fat, right? So carbohydrates are actually something too. They don't convert very easily into fat, right? A lot of people are afraid of carbohydrates, thinking, I'm going to get fat if I eat too much carbohydrates. It's actually very difficult for the body to convert fat into carbohydrates. It actually does this via a process called de novo lipogenesis, right? And as I'm going to talk about in one of the next points, go into that a little bit more, is that it's really inefficient to do that, right? And so the reason why carbohydrates, are restricted, or why a low carbohydrate diet is effective for losing fat, is because it helps you to reduce your hunger. It also helps you to get out of a insulin state, right? So when you eat carbohydrates or food in general, your insulin levels go up, right? And carbohydrates have the strongest effect on insulin, right? And so when you're eating plenty of carbohydrates and calories in general, if you add fat into your diet, that fat will tend to be stored as fat versus burned as energy. If you reduce your carbohydrates, then the fat in your diet tends to be used as energy versus getting stored. And so that's why sometimes, people be afraid of the carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, if you reduce your fat down super low and ate a high protein, low fat, moderate carbohydrate diet, you would not be gaining a bunch of fat. You'd actually be very lean. Actually, the leanest I ever was in my life was when I was eating that way, right? And I was like 7% body fat at that point. Had lots of energy and stuff, but I would also get, had some other issues going on and stuff. I actually personally believe in a more balanced approach most of the time, with going to the extremes at certain points, depending on what your goals are, and then reverting back to that balanced approach. Actually, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I have a fat loss guide that I actually detail out my philosophy on how to fine-tune your diet to actually get the best for you, regardless of the circumstances you're in, and also to fine-tune it as life's your environment changes. Maybe you're an athlete and then you go to just try to maintain. Maybe you have an office job and then or you have a manual labor job and you transition to an office job. All that kind of stuff. How to make the diet work regardless of the circumstances you're in. So if you're interested in that and checking that out, leave a comment in the section. Comment section below. I'll send you that information, and we'll get on with the video here. All right, number 5. So a common fear of many people during the holidays is that they're going to gain a bunch of weight, or if they go out on a trip or something, I'm going to gain a bunch of weight because I ate too many calories in one meal. Now, this is a misconception because you can actually gain weight, but the weight's is very unlikely that it's going to be fat weight that you gain from eating too much in 1 or 2 meals, okay? And the reason for this, as you can see, is when somebody adopts a low carbohydrate diet, right? They often will lose a lot of weight right away. And it's not because they're losing fat weight. Yes, they'll probably lose a little bit if they're in a calorie deficit, right? But the majority of the weight that they're losing is from glycogen and water bonded to the glycogen. Because for every gram of glucose or glycogen stored in the muscles, it also holds on to 2 grams of water. And so hence the water weight. So bodybuilders in the past would only suck on like water chips and stuff like that as they're coming into the show, so that they'd not be holding any water in between their skin and their muscles, so that they show as much muscle definition as possible. I don't recommend doing this. It's a pretty unhealthy practice to do, but it just showcases how it can make a difference. And it's not fat, but it's water that you're holding on to, particularly depending on what the composition of the meal was, right? If you have a meal that's pretty high in carbohydrates and you eat a whole ton of calories, it's pretty likely that you're going to gain a bunch of water weight from doing that, right? But it doesn't mean that you're gaining fat. Okay, so if you don't believe me, there was actually a study where they took a group of healthy men, right, and they overfed them in one meal. So in this one meal, they gave them 2,000 calories in one meal, and most of it, and it was actually like bread and jam, was the majority of what was in this meal, right? So if I look at it, it was about, what was it here? Yes, so it was 480 grams of carbohydrates, 8 grams of fat, and a small amount of protein was in this meal, right? And then they tracked their metabolic response over the 10 hours following this meal, okay? And not surprisingly, 346 grams of that carbohydrate, of the 480 that they ate, was actually converted into glycogen, or stored in your muscles and your liver, right? For fuel for use later on, right? Not fat. The other 133 grams of that carbohydrate was actually burned as fuel, right? So that's what happens. Is like your body, when you eat something, it's going to take what it needs for immediate use right away, right? That quick energy, So probably like the jam or whatever, right? It's used as that quick energy for your immediate uses that you need right now. Whatever your body doesn't use right now then gets converted into glycogen to be used later. If your glycogen stores are already full, then it will convert that into then the excess calories will be converted into fat, right? But if you are being active on a consistent basis and you happen to, or especially if you're dieting, right? So if you're dieting, you're depleting yourself, you're in a calorie deficit for a couple of weeks or something, and then, or even like a week, right? And then you have a refeed and you eat, what you normally would eat, or even slightly more, it's not going to cause you to gain all that fat back, right? If anything, as you'll see later on in the study, and it's actually borne out by my own personal experience, when I was first getting into this, I found this out by accident when I was living down La Crosse. If anything, it can actually help you to accelerate your fat loss by having this overfeeding, especially if it's from the right combination of things. If you're having more carbohydrates or something, right? Not only can it cause you to have more energy, give you a psychological break from dieting, it's going to give you more energy, and because your insulin sensitivity is higher, you're going to get more energy out of those extra calories that you eat. So if anything, it could be a net positive of having this overfeed, provided you actually do need it, okay? So anyway, in this study, only 2 grams of the 480 grams of carbohydrate was converted to fat. And so yes, your body can convert carbohydrates to fat via de novo lipogenesis, right? But it's a very inefficient process. And so it's more likely that, a lot of people are afraid that carbohydrates are going to cause them to get fat, right? And so you have like the low carb craze now and the carnivore diet, the keto diet, and all these different things, right? If you do have fat to lose and you're just eating a regular diet that has plenty of carbohydrates, it's going to be pretty hard for your body to tap into its fat stores because it has plenty of energy available from what you're feeding it, right? And so the other thing is that if you try to restrict your calories on a high carbohydrate diet, you're going to feel hungry all the time. You're going to get low. You're going to feel weak. You're going to feel, brain fog and stuff like that because your primary fuel source up until this point has been carbohydrates, and you're still feeding your body carbohydrates, but just not enough. If you go even lower than that, and then you get into a state of ketosis, you'll actually have more energy and you'll think better and you won't have this hangry feeling, and you'll actually feel great while you're losing body fat. And that's the benefits of ketosis or fasting, things like that. So once you get through that initial stages of it, you actually feel better and have more energy and you function better even as you are losing body fat. All right, so following the study, they did a 10-hour follow-up tracking different parameters of the participants in the study. And what they found was that in this follow-up, not only did they not gain any fat, they actually burned 17 grams of fat following the study. So in the actual study, as you may recall, there was 8 grams of fat in the meal. So this was a very high carbohydrate meal. Most of it was carbohydrates, like 480 grams carbs, right? And there was only 8 grams of fat in the meal, and then a pretty negligible amount of protein, right? Probably whatever was in the bread they were eating, okay? And then via de novo lipogenesis, as I talked about before, 2 grams of those carbohydrates were converted to fat. So now we have a total of 10 grams of fat that was either ingested or created in the process of this meal in the 10 hours following the study, right? Now, as you noticed at the beginning of this clip, I said that they had actually burned 17 grams of fat in the 10 hours following the study. So that's 7 grams above and beyond what they were either ingesting or creating via de novo lipogenesis. So that's very interesting because, and it actually kind of matches up with my own experience. So when I was living in La Crosse, right after I graduated from technical college, and I was working for a actually train company at the time, now it's called American Standard, but I worked in their research and development department as a lab technician, and the engineers would come down and basically tell us the parameters to run our equipment on, and then we would just monitor it until the engineers wanted us to change it again. So that's besides the point. But anyway, at this time I was at the peak of my health problems that I was having. So I had really bad digestive health, gut problems, all this kind of stuff. I had lost a ton of weight since high school and was very unhealthy. And in the process of trying to fix that, I had basically tried to do a kind of a plan where I would like separate all the different food groups out, because I'd read this book. I kind of just cherry picked it. I was very lazy, and I didn't realize that the book, the main focus of it was for people trying to lose weight, right? But he said that different macronutrients use different processes in the body to be metabolized, right? So he's like, it's very unhealthy to mix different food groups together. So for example, a hamburger would be bad because of the process that is metabolizing carbohydrates is different than that for fat, and when you combine them, you cause inflammation, and then it causes obesity, all these different things, right? So I was thinking, okay, well, if it's bad for the body, I didn't, read about the main crux of why he was doing this, but I figured, well, maybe that's why I have these digestive problems. In the past, I didn't eat a lot of protein per se. I just kind of ate whatever was, the traditional kind of American sort of diet. I had cereal, sandwiches, that kind of stuff. And it was not until in high school when I tried to start building more muscle that I started increasing my protein intake. And so I was like, well, maybe if I, do what he's saying, I can, put less strain on my digestive system. So I went from doing that, and actually I ended up getting very lean, lost a lot of weight, because the protocol was I'd eat mainly carbohydrates in the morning, a little less in the afternoon, and then no carbohydrates in the evening other than just vegetables. So I'd have, hamburger patty, chicken breast, or whatever with vegetables in the evening, and that's how I did things, right? And so after that, that wasn't working so good and everything. So then I was like, well, you know what? I felt really good, again, when I wasn't eating an excessive amount of animal protein like I was when I was trying to bodybuild or power lift in high school. And so I was like, well, maybe if I tried a vegetarian diet, that'll work. So I was eating a lot of beans and rice and peanut butter sandwiches and that kind of stuff, right? And what I discovered, because prior to that, I had gone to a doctor and he said that, well, you have a yeast infection. You have this candida going on. So he put me on a very low sugar, low starch sort of diet. So I couldn't eat the oats that I normally ate, no rice, no bread, no fruit whatsoever. So I could have beans, essentially beans, sweet potatoes, meat, and vegetables is all I could have, right? And so I didn't know anything about glycemic index and all that kind of stuff. And so inadvertently, because of the way that these things affect your hormones, I was eating less calories just because they were a lot more filling than the foods that I had been eating before. But I was just inadvertently eating less calories, right? And so at this point in my life, I was eating when I switched to doing the vegetarian, so like this was before that, and then I'd done this other diet, and now I was trying to do the vegetarian diet. So I was already acclimated to eating very low sugar, very, no fruit either, right? And so what I discovered that when I was eating mainly just, because at this point I transitioned back, so I was eating more starches and stuff. It was beans and rice, peanut butter sandwiches on like my mom's whole wheat bread, and then, I'd have some vegetables, but not a lot, right? And what I noticed was that eating this way with starches and stuff, I could eat way more and not get fat. And later on I realized why that is because, starches like glucose and stuff, they often get vilified, but they're actually the most efficient form of fuel for your body other than like alcohol, right? And like if you say, for example, take fructose, a lot of that is going to be converted to fat just in the digestion process. Whereas glucose, it's only like 2% of the calories from it will be, and like as you saw in that previous study, only 2 grams of that entire like 480 grams of carbohydrates in that meal were converted to fat, right? So it's a lot harder, and so now it makes a lot more sense. But anyway, I'm kind of going off on this rambling thing, right? But what I'm trying to say here is that even though, so basically I started, I was trying, because I dropped down like 145 pounds, and I didn't feel great, I was pretty lean, I could eat a lot more food and not gain weight, but I didn't feel good, right? And so I was trying to figure out, well, I need to build more, like get my muscles back and stuff and gain some weight. So I'd go and eat burritos at Taco Bell, I'd eat frozen pizzas, all these different things. And really it threw off my hormonal balance, right? So I lost touch with my actual hunger signals and stuff. And so like, it was like I would eat, but I didn't feel satisfied like I had in the past when I was eating these more balanced meals, like actual like a hamburger or a sandwich, or and actually only eating when I was hungry and eating whole foods predominantly, right? And so what in the process would happen is that I would kind of binge. I would like eat a bunch of food, and then I would feel so disgusting that I wouldn't eat a bunch of food for a while. And so like about once a week or so, I'd have this big binge, where I'd feel like I was a waterlogged barrel, and stuff. And I just like, oh, why did I do that to myself, And so then I would like feel disgusted with the food the next few days and stuff, and I'd eat very little, and actually was craving a lot of vegetables, so I'd eat a lot of vegetables and whatnot. And then I'd feel like, I'd go and eat a bunch of food again, right, and stuff. And so in this cycle, what I noticed, I was progressively getting leaner and leaner, though. Even though I'd have these binge things followed by not eating very much. And granted, I wasn't eating sugar or alcohol or anything like that. It was mainly like I would binge on like eating a bunch of like, bowls of like oatmeal or something like that. Or I'd get a whole sleeve of hamburger patties and I'd eat all that or something. Or I'd eat like a whole pizza or something, and then not eat for a long time after that, right? And so that's where I kind of learned, and I didn't know why it was happening, but it kind of makes sense now that basically you're putting yourself in this calorie deficit, and then all of a sudden you binge, but it's not enough to take you out of that deficit anymore, but it ramps up your metabolism again, gets it going again, and then you go back to doing that. Now, I don't advise doing this because it doesn't feel good when you binge and eat way too much food, but it actually, if you are eating a more balanced, what I recommend is eating a more, like in the fat loss guide that I'm recommending that you check out, is that you figure out what your macronutrient ratio should be based upon this questionnaire that you go through, right? And then there's these signs and symptoms and stuff that you can kind of fine tune, dial things in. Now, if you decide, okay, and now I want to, cut calories back, drop down, and honestly, if you're eating this way, you probably won't even need to do that. Everything will get dialed in, pretty good, and your body will self-regulate itself, right? But let's say you do decide, okay, I want to get really lean for like a bodybuilding competition or something, and I reduce my carbohydrates, reduce my calories, right? So you do that, but just do it slightly, right? Maybe 10 to 20% deficit. And then when you start to feel like, okay, I'm getting too hungry, then you like refeed over maybe a day, maybe 2, maybe 3 or whatever, depending on how much you're eating in that thing. And that way you're not like totally going overboard and feeling disgusting afterwards, but you just kind of gradually increase the calories back to where to the maintenance calories, and then you drop back down again. And in doing this, it's a super effective way to progressively get yourself leaner and leaner and be able to maintain that like indefinitely. Like, so for me, now granted, I do things specific to me, and this is why I'm a big fan of the stuff that I have in my fat loss guide and stuff, because I fine-tuned it over the years. But I literally maintain my body fat percentage at 10% or less year-round for years and years on end and stuff, and I actually perform better this way. It's not like I'm, suffering when I'm doing this. I actually feel better when I do this and stuff. So definitely possible, and that's kind of the point. You want to feel better. It's not like, a lot of times the reason people jump off their, diets and stuff with their exercise routine, they're like, well, I used to work out and I used to eat healthy and stuff, but I wanted to enjoy my life. And I'm like, well, you were definitely doing it wrong if you had to stop because you wanted to start enjoying your life again. So if you do it right, it makes your life way better. And that's actually the biggest reason why I continue to work out and why I continue to train, is because for the mind and for my emotional state and for my performance in every aspect of my life, not just for the way my body looks, but also for how I feel. Okay, so the last misconception in regards to calories is that you absorb all the calories from the food that you eat. Now, as we talked about before, obviously the way that the food is prepared, so whether it's cooked, whether it's frozen, toast, that kind of stuff, whether it's raw, what kind of food it is. So like if the cellular walls of the food, like in the nuts and stuff, if they are very tough and hard to absorb, it's not going to, how well you chew your food. Different things like that are going to affect how much, calories you actually get out of it and extract from the food. And this is one of the reasons why, in addition to others, that alcohol can be a big contributor to weight gain, is because it's already essentially pre-digested. So your body has to do almost zero work to extract the calories from the alcohol. It also limits lipogenesis, or not lipogenesis, but beta oxidation, as I talked about in some other videos too. And beta oxidation is where fats are broken down and converted into fuel energy, and so alcohol actually limits that. So there can be different reasons for that. But above and beyond that, our bodies are estimated at only being maybe about 90% efficient at extracting calories. And if you look at, there were some Dutch researchers, and they took 25 different test subjects, and they analyzed their stools. Now, granted, 25 people isn't that large an amount of people, but what they did is they looked at the total calories absorbed from the meal as a whole, and it was only 89.4%, right, of the total calories that they absorbed. From fat, it was 92.5% of the calories from fat were absorbed. So fat has the highest absorption rate of between carbohydrates and protein, right? So protein, they only absorbed 86.9, or about 87% of their calories. And then for fat, it was 87.3% that they absorbed from the food that they ate, right? Now, what was possibly the most surprising of this is that women actually absorbed less calories from their meals than men did. And between carbohydrates and fat, they actually absorbed even less than that. Now, the last part on the carbs and fat, it was not statistically significant, so I wouldn't put too much weight on that, but that they did find that in the study. Now, the actual numbers was that on average, women only absorbed 88% of the calories in the meal, whereas men absorbed 91.8%. So maybe about 3 to 4% difference there. So, in closing out this video, there's no hard and fast rule for either counting your calories or the specific diet you should be on. That's why I say don't be a dieter, become a detective. Learn to read the signs and symptoms that your body is giving you, which you can do in my fat loss guide that I have. And it's a great way to kind of start your journey in that regard. The other thing is to focusing on more on what you're eating versus how much you're eating. Because if you focus on eating the right foods in the right quantities, ratios of those foods, you will naturally end up eating more in line with how much food you should be, right? Because you have certain hormones like insulin, leptin, ghrelin, and cortisol, right? That all play a role in determining how your food is processed, how much of the calories you absorb, also how hungry you get, how long you stay full, how quickly you get full, whether you have cravings or not, right? And so by balancing out your hormones, you will naturally end up eating the appropriate amount. So, for example, ghrelin is kind of like a pressure sensor, right? It senses how full your stomach is, right? And it actually literally is a pressure sensor. So it'll feel the stretch, right? It'll feel like the stretch in your stomach, and that's why eating whole foods is more beneficial, because if you're eating the whole foods, including the fiber and all the water and stuff innate in that food, it's going to give you the more accurate signal of how much you should be eating, right? The other thing is that it will also determine, how long you stay full, right? And ghrelin can actually be set on a clock. So depending on what time of day that you eat, that's the time of day, normally eat, right? That's the time of day that you will get hungry in the future. Okay, so you can actually change, your hunger signals. And I know this to be true because the majority of the time I don't eat breakfast or lunch. I eat one meal a day at the end of the day, unless it's on my days off and I'm doing a lot more brain work. And I find that, when I'm thinking very intensely, I need a little bit more glucose maybe to my brain to help it function more appropriately. But when I'm walking around and talking and doing stuff like that, I find that I actually do well not eating for the majority of the day. And my body has been trained to adapt for that. The other hormone, leptin, is actually kind of like the fuel gauge on a car, right? But for your fat cells, okay? So if your leptin hormone is working appropriately, it will basically tell you that when you are very lean, okay, we need to stop moving as much, right? And so this is a problem for people who are, trying to get very lean for a bodybuilding competition. Maybe they're doing their cardio and their workouts in the gym, they're keeping their calories low, but then their body starts inadvertently causing them to, move less. Maybe they're fidgeting less, they will, do a little less chores around the house, different things like that. And so they actually have to consciously, track and measure how many steps they're taking a day so that they're not, sabotaging themselves by moving less, even though they're still doing their workouts, right? And so that's the actual natural function that leptin should do, right? By the same token, if you have plenty of fat on your body, it will also tell you, hey, you need to eat less, let's move more, right? And so you'll find, I have more energy, I want to go do things, I don't feel as hungry and stuff. And so it'll keep your body fat within a normal, healthy range. But what happens is that oftentimes if people are eating a lot of highly processed foods, too much sugar, stuff like that, their leptin, they'll become what is called leptin resistant. Just as you could become insulin resistant, and their body will not take those normal cues that it normally would. And so even though they have plenty of fat on their body, they'll still feel like they're starving. And often many of the chemicals that are in fast foods and stuff are combined, and also the ratios where they combine different ratios of sugar, salt, taste, and stuff like that to make you actually want to eat more and actually feel hungrier the more that you're eating based upon the chemicals that are in the food. So if your body is actually functioning how it should, you should be able to maintain a healthy body fat percentage, which for men is anywhere between 10 to 15%, depending on your age, and for women is around that 15 to 20% body fat. Now you can go a little bit lower, or for guys, and depending on the guy, and a lot of times genetics plays into this too, where you have a certain set point that you want to stay. But if you are eating appropriately, you're exercising regularly, having a good balance between your strength training, your cardiovascular training, and you're eating predominantly whole foods, you should be able to, relatively easily maintain these body fat percentages. So the goal is to become more of that detective versus the dieter, and find out what works best for you, make small incremental changes rather than drastic changes, jumping back and forth from one thing, make a logical decision on why you're doing the protocol that you're doing, and then track and measure, how is it performing? Like, am I getting the results that I want? And then go back to the drawing board, make an intelligent, informed decision on why you're making that change to your diet or your training program, and then proceed from there. All right, guys, it's becoming a very long video. Hopefully you gained some valuable insight into some common misconceptions surrounding calories that you can then go and use in your own fitness and fat loss goals, right? Or even, muscle building goals, potentially. Although this video is more surrounding people who have the goal to lose fat. But hopefully you gained some valuable insight from that. If you did, make sure you hit that like button below. So, it encourages me to continue making content like this. It also is good for the algorithm so that more people who would possibly benefit from this kind of information will see it. And then if you'd like to see more information related to diet in regards to fat loss, muscle building, or athletic performance, also workout design for the same type of things, primarily muscle building and athletic performance, and then also how to avoid injuries from happening and then work around them if they should happen in the future, then consider subscribing to the channel by hitting the button in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. And we'll see you all next time for more health and fitness-related information. Thanks, guys, for watching.